Jets.
MKB, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports, covers the Sixers in the NBA. Sixers at the break. He was there, to cover this team in the game, and I obviously think we start with Al Horford going to the bench last night, Michael. Your take on this. How much did that change the game last night, and was it enough that Brett Brown will now have to consider doing it moving forward? Do you think he will?
I have one word, Mike. Finally.
Yes.
It's about time. I mean, that's a really tough move to make, obviously, given the magnitude of his contract. 4 years, $109 million over the offseason. He certainly didn't sign it to be a bench player, and I don't think Josh Harris and company, gave him that deal with the thought that he would be in a reserve role, in his first season especially. But, it was something that I've been saying for a while, and I'm certainly not trying to say I'm the only one. I think a lot of people that have been watching this team since, opening day have said that, Al has said as much himself, the fit just wasn't working. I think moving him to the bench maximizes the talent for everyone. Obviously, it lets him operate more at his natural position at center and play more down on the block as opposed to on the perimeter. And then for the first five, it gives them another shooter. Brett went with Furkan in the first half and then GR3 in the second half in the starting spot. Just having one more shooter rather than another, post-oriented player opened it up for Ben, opened it up for Joel. And I think, Brett was non-committal about it in terms of moving forward if it was going to be the permanent solution. But, I think you have to at least continue to try it based off of how it looked last night.
Did Al seem? Al's Al. I mean, he's the most professional guy I think I've ever covered in the NBA. However, did he seem like off? Did he seem like, yeah, I can accept this. This is cool. Did he seem like it was what vibe did you get from Al Horford?
I would say he was really even about the situation. I don't think I'd be lying if I said he was excited about it. I don't think he's like I said, he certainly didn't sign here to become a bench player right away. But I think he was kind of accepting of it and realizing that it might be not only beneficial for the team, but beneficial for him as well in order to maximize what he can bring to a team. And Brett obviously was asked about it and talked about it a lot. And he said that Al, he had the conversation and took it like a true professional, like you said. He understood and respected the decision and where it was coming from. So, I don't think Al's the type of guy that if he doesn't like it, he's not going to create an issue in the locker room this season. Maybe it's something that would come up over the off season if, he would go to the front office or ownership and say, listen, I'm not happy in this role. But I think at least for the rest of this season, he would be and is willing to, make that move for the betterment of the team. And who knows, maybe that could be the spark that, opens things up for them that they, reach that level that they haven't been able to reach yet this season.
Finally is also the first thing that I said as well, MKB. So the move is made, Horford to the bench, and what transpires is arguably Ben Simmons' best game of his career, given the circumstances and everything else that's been going on surrounding this Sixers team. Do you point to Horford coming off the bench and that move as a direct effect of what we saw from Ben Simmons, or is it a coincidence or a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both, Ryan. I think there was definitely kind of an attitude amongst the team that they wanted to go out and send a message, given, like you kind of referenced, all that's been going on social media, especially with Joel and the back and forth with the fans since, the Chicago game and coming off the losing streak on the road. I think that they really wanted to come out and send a statement. And then I think moving Al to the bench kind of gave both of those guys, Joel and Ben, I don't want to say an extra level of confidence, but just an extra feeling of, all right, this move was made for us to take advantage of it, and it opens up space a little bit more. And like we said, Ben had another triple-double, 26, 12, and 10. Joel with, a monster game, 26 and 9. And that's what you want to see from those guys. And I think that, putting Al in a position where he can do what he's most comfortable with while simultaneously opening things up for Ben and Joel is, pretty much a no-brainer, regardless of who fills that starting spot, whether it's, Furkan full-time, if they go to Matisse, whoever it may be. Having another quicker perimeter guy for Ben to get up and down the floor on the break and spread the floor around Joel, I think that's what a lot of us have been saying for a while, and it's nice to see, Brett at least try it. It may, if he ultimately doesn't like it and goes back to Al, that's, maybe that will happen, but at least he can say, I tried this, which is, I think, at least what a lot of people have wanted to see.
Yeah, and something that's been under the radar a little bit regarding the game last night, just maybe for the average fan at least, not saying for you, but Josh Richardson. So 17 points in the fourth quarter, finished with 21. And I feel like it was a night of like Brett Brown showing everyone, you think you know me, you don't know me, because he puts the ball in Richardson's hands. He runs a lot of pick and rolls, which is something he's not known for. He's done that throughout the year, but he went to it late in the game last night, and Jay Rich came through for him, and Simmons was off the ball as the screener. So just talk about what you saw there.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. That's a good point. And I think Jay Rich, staying healthy, obviously he's still coming off the minutes restriction. He just got bumped back into the starting lineup. But I think he's going to play a huge role, probably even bigger than he has so far this season, moving down into the playoffs, because the Sixers, obviously they didn't add a playmaker at the deadline, and depending on what happens at the buyout, they didn't add a point guard behind Ben other than Neto, who, obviously he hasn't played in the past couple of games and doesn't have Brett's, I would say his full confidence in terms of the guy he can lean on. So a lot of that secondary ball handling and playmaking, I think, is going to end up coming down to Josh, kind of like you just referenced, where he'll run pick and roll as the ball handler and maybe Ben as the screener, and him kind of playing as a secondary point guard on this team. I think that's something, especially when the rotations shrink a little bit come playoff time. I think the ball is going to be in Josh's hands even more to make plays both for the team and, like we saw last night, like you said, him scoring 17 in the fourth with his, pull-ups or his ability to catch and shoot off of Ben penetration. It's huge, obviously, and it's a perfect fit for the Sixers. So I think, him staying healthy, obviously, is the number one key, because he's going to play a really big role for this team moving forward. And that's not even to mention, what he can do defensively in terms of guarding, 1, 2s, or 3s.
All right, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports, covers the Sixers at the Real Mike KB on Twitter. So 55 games in, they're one game off the pace from last year, but obviously things feel so different. Is that blown out of proportion?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. I mean, I think they're in as good a position to compete still to potentially reach the finals, or at least the conference finals, as they were, last year or at any point heading into the season. Obviously, they need to clean up some things on the road, but, these victories over these good teams at home, it's not a coincidence. It shows their, how high their ceiling can be. And I think now with, potentially this move with Al moved to the bench and the additions they made at the deadline in terms of 2 other guys that could help them space the floor, if they can play like they did last night, or at least have that same attitude, meaning that, that they're not going to sit around, they're going to, be on the attack, be proactive. If they play like that, I think they can compete with any team in this league. So I think the focus has been way more on the negative, and some part it's legitimate. A 9-19 mark on the road for a team with this much talent is definitely worthy of some criticism. But then at the same time, a 25-2 record at home is outstanding. They have 2, Ben and Joel. It seems like they're getting more attention in the negative light when both of them are still under 26, and both are, as they showed last night, can be phenomenal players. So I think there's definitely still questions, but the national, the negativity surrounding the team, I think, has definitely been overblown, especially within the locker room too. It doesn't seem to have seeped into the spirit of the team. I think if a team was divided or fractured, like some of the reports would have you believe, they wouldn't have been able to respond against a good Clippers team in the manner that they did last night. So I think there's definitely still some questions, but not maybe as extreme as you would think this, watching SportsCenter.
Yeah, and I actually have said the same thing you did there, Michael, last week, is that I said, the Sharks were in the water. The Sixers were down, and the national media likes to jump on that, and it's an easy way to just, hey, they look bad, they got fractures. I thought the issues were being a little overblown, but one issue is this. They beat the very best at home. You said how high the ceiling can be. So they beat the Clippers, they beat the Lakers, they beat the Bucks, but they're 9-19 on the road. What is more of an indication of who they are? The team that wins the home games against the very best, or the team that's 9-19 on the road? And which one of those matters more, being able to beat the best or not being able to win on the road?
That's tough, Mike, because I think you can make a legitimate argument either way. I tend to be a little bit more I don't know, I guess optimistic in terms of the Sixers, and I think the fact that they've shown that they can, handle the Bucks, the Lakers, missing 2 starters, the Clippers, the Nuggets, all these teams that they've shown that they can take care of them, I think says a little bit more about the team because, like I said before, I don't think it's you sure playing at home is an advantage, but there's no other team in the league that's beaten the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Bucks, and I think it says, more about the Sixers, how good they can be as opposed to how poor they play on the road. Now, obviously, that's not glossing over. They're not going to go anywhere if they don't improve the road play, and I think that, it may have taken a while, but I think they finally understand that, and hopefully after the All-Star break, they'll come out and start winning some road games and showing that, hey, we know we have to do this. But ultimately, I think my main takeaway at this point in the season is, obviously they do need to address those issues, but that they're fixable and the answers are already on the team.
What's the biggest wild card for you right now, MKB? Not the road record, not the roller coaster ride of a season, not social media posts, but tangible, play, whether it's Embiid or Simmons jump shot or Matisse off the bench, whatever it is, tangible from the team, whether it's coaching, personnel, lineup wise. What's a wild card that you feel like could really come back and bite them?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I'm gonna, the first thing that jumped out to me, obviously Al, but even the other guy they gave big money to this offseason, Tobias. I think he's a wild card in my eyes because obviously they paid him the money to be the third guy, and he's been solid this season. You know what I mean? You wouldn't necessarily complain about his production. He's been consistent. You kind of know what you're going to get. But if there's a way for him to I don't think he's fully stepped into that role as a third guy. And in the playoffs, when you're paying him the money to be that guy, it's kind of either make or break time. And I'll be interested to see, last year I thought he kind of had, not an excuse, but obviously by the time the playoffs rolled around, he'd only been on the team for a couple months. He was kind of still finding his role. He was, Jimmy was here, Ben, Joel, so he was, pretty low down on the pecking order. And now, a year later, after the contract this summer, the expectations are going to be there for him to produce. And I think there's times where it's, not that you forget he's on the floor, but where he just doesn't contribute, to a big enough extent in the playoffs when, so much of the attention obviously is going to be on Joel in the post and on Ben in transition and slowing them down. That's when you're going to need the other ancillary guys to step up, and Tobias is, that number one guy that they're going to need to do that. So for me, a huge X factor going in the playoffs is going to be his ability to kind of step up to the moment and not have 16, 18-point games consistently, but more so, maybe 24, 26, 28-point games. And I think that could end up being the difference in, a series and potentially even the team's playoff run entirely.
All right, MKB, the 2 new guys. Was last night their roles? Did they expand? How do you foresee that? I know we got a very, very small sample size. We've only seen Burks here 1 game, Robinson 2. But do you anticipate bigger roles, or was last night what you should expect?
I think it's still fluid, Mike. I think, Brett, obviously that was the first game where he had both of them together at the same time. And now he has, a plethora of guys to bring off the bench in terms of perimeter players when you're talking, Furkan, Matisse, and then the 2 guys they just brought in. Obviously, Shake Milton was getting a little bit of time before the deadline. So, that's 5 different guys that he has to figure out, kind of carve out a role for. So I think we'll see a little bit more, a little change. Last night's not necessarily reflective of how it's going to be, but I don't think either of those guys are going to be expected to come in and play, huge minutes, considering that they have, a couple other guys that I think, he's not going to abandon, cut Matisse's minutes too much. Obviously, Furkan has shown how valuable he can be out there as a floor spacer. So obviously that, Brett's going to want to continue to give him some steady minutes. So I think it's going to be a situation where it could depend on matchups, as he likes to say a lot, in terms of his rotation. If one game Burks has the hot hand, or he has a good matchup defensively, he'll ride with him while GR3 doesn't get as many minutes, or the situation could be reversed. But I think for the next, once they get back after All-Star break, the first couple weeks after that, I think it'll still be fluid with Brett kind of figuring out where they fit best, and then once it gets closer to April, to try to iron out a little bit more of a solid unfluid rotation.
Yeah, and then obviously, I mean, the big story at last night is, forget all the other stuff, the 2 best players played like the 2 best players, and when they do, That's your difference. That's the difference between them being, a disappointing team and a title contending team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've said that a couple times, and it's true of the NBA in general, Mike. I know you like to say that it's a league that's a talent-driven league. Coaches only go so as far as the talent, and that's the case. With pretty much any team, you're only going to go as far as your best players can take you. And I think there's a lot of fair questions about if Ben and Joel are ready to take that next step in terms of being, obviously they're great players at a young age, but the next step is for them to show that they're ready to, be leaders of a legitimate championship team. And I think obviously there's some questions about that, and fairly so, but I think that there's still the opportunity coming back for the rest of the season that they could take that step if they're able to play with the vigor and the way that they did last night. And maybe, if moving Al to the bench is kind of the key to unlocking that, then I think, Brett will probably continue to roll with that. And we might see, Joel continuing to have fun, which is a good thing. And Ben, continuing to be as aggressive as he has been for the past few months.
All right, MKB, they're in the 5 spot, 13 games back of Milwaukee, 2 games back of the Heat for the 4 spot. They're 4 games behind Boston for the 3 spot. And they're about 7 games behind Toronto for the 2 spot. Realistic expectation on how far, with the remaining games left, they can move up these conference standings?
I think they can get up to 3, Mike, realistically. I think they'll finish either 3rd or 4th. I think, obviously, they're not catching the Bucks. And I think the Raptors, they're starting to pull ahead into that 2nd spot. They've won 15 straight, and they're finally starting to get healthy after a ton of injury issues this season. So I think they'll probably continue to stack up the wins after the break. So I think the Celtics and the Heat are both catchable. Obviously, it's going to be close, and those 3 could shake out in any way. I wouldn't be shocked if the Sixers ended up staying in that 5 seed. But the Heat have been cooling off a little bit recently. They're only 5-5 over their last 10. So I think the Sixers could get as high as 3 or finish as low as 5.
All right, he's Michael Kaskey-Blomain, and of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Sixers at the All-Star break, 34-21. Last year, they were 35-20. It's a 1-game difference. But as Stan Van Gundy said, last year the 51 wins got you the 3 seed. 51 wins this year is probably not going to get you that 3 seed. So if you're in that 51 win range again, it's going to put you in that 4-5 area. So the Sixers either going to need to get a lot better, hot in the second half, or probably play on the road, maybe in these even in the first round, which would be a tough, because it looked like it would be a Miami-Philly 4-5 matchup as it would stand right now. All right, Michael, All-Star break, man. Enjoy it.
Thanks, fellas. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we all need the All-Star break. Although, what are we going to complain about over the next 9 days? You can't fire Brett Brown after they beat the Clippers and won 3 straight during the All-Star break.